With Nintendo's 69 games on the Switch's expansion pack, it seems like GameCube games are inevitable, and that may be, but even so, there are still quite a few hurdles that are going to keep it from happening for quite a while, and if you give me like 5 minutes, then I'll tell you what those hurdles are. I think it's a given that Nintendo's planning on dishing GameCube games out with their subscription model, seeing as how they've been so weird about putting anything from that console onto the Switch up until now. I mean, yeah, we did get Mario Sunshine in a compilation, but that's because Nintendo had to have something big for the holidays of 2020, so they really had absolutely no choice after the pandemic kind of ruined their development schedule that year. Even then, we only had it for about 6 months before Nintendo yanked it back from us. They didn't even leave it on the eShop, and the only reason I think they'd do that is because they had plans for the GameCube all along. Granted, I'm probably giving Nintendo way too much credit here considering some of the NES and Super Nintendo games they've given us, but the GameCube's got like 20 games that make them assloads of money with Switch remasters, yet they still haven't done it yet, so if it's not to save them for the online service, then I don't see why else they'd keep these games all to themselves. But if the plan really is to put GameCube games on the Switch, then why the frig hasn't it happened yet? Well, it took years just to get NES games, and even longer than that for Super Nintendo games, so the first hurdle is that the below-oversized end really likes to milk things, and since I'd imagine the GameCube won't even be the next console I think we're gonna have, I think we're gonna have to wait a good while longer. Plus, while GameCube games may have relatively small file sizes by today's standards, an entire library's worth of them would still take a considerable amount of space up, seeing as Nintendo's subscription-based games are all just kinda downloaded to your console at once rather than simply giving you the option to download whatever you want. This isn't really a problem with all the games on the service right now, seeing as how the file sizes to them are all about as big as my crumb, but the GameCube's where things started to get a little more complex, so unless Nintendo changes things, is everyone really gonna want to free 1.3 gigabytes up for top angler real bass fishing? These are the same people who gave us Jelly Boys, so don't fool yourselves into thinking this wouldn't be possible. Again, I know they could just revamp the service to where we wouldn't have to download all the games all at once, but remember, this is Nintendo we're talking about here, so just because companies like Microsoft are capable of common sense when it comes to the internet, that doesn't mean that we could expect the same thing from Nintendo. To be fair though, one non-hurdle that we have though is the fact that the Switch already lets you use authentic GameCube controllers thanks to the Melee community's relentlessness intimidating Nintendo into submission. So, you know, at least we wouldn't have to buy any controllers from sketchy vendors in the back alleys at Kmart just so expansion pack games won't feel awkward with a Switch controller. Then again, just because 64 and Genesis games may be on the expansion pack, who's to say that Nintendo won't try to fork more money out of us just to roll the purple lunchbox games out? Granted, Microsoft charges more for Game Pass than Nintendo does for the expansion pack, but even if all Nintendo's past games were available, nobody likes a price increase, so you can bet that there's definitely going to be riots if that day ever comes, and if you ask me, I'd bet that it will. After all, Nintendo would probably make way more money if they just remastered all the best GameCube games. I mean, Paper Mario and the Thousand Year Door hasn't seen the light of day since it initially came out, which I'm sure makes Miyamoto happier than my buddy Lonnie on Father's Day, seeing as how he hates the first 2 games in the series, but even so, everybody else seems to love them, despite the fact that most haven't actually played them themselves, yet Nintendo's still probably gonna opt for tossing it into a pile of other games on the subscription service someday. And hell, Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD already had HD remasters done for the Wii U, so you'd think that Nintendo would want to put them on the console that people actually own and sell millions more copies, right? After all, the Wii U sold like poop, and the GameCube may have done a little bit better, but there's still over 80 million more Switch owners than there ever were GameCube owners, and I'd imagine that some of them would be eager to buy Wind Waker HD, and on a side note, I pity anybody who hasn't gotten their greasy paws on this game yet. My point about all this, though, is that if Nintendo's gonna leave all this money on the table by putting all their GameCube games on a subscription service, then they're gonna at least want to charge a little bit extra. Not saying that's right or wrong, I'm just calling it like I see it. Speaking of Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, though, if they really do come to the Switch's online service, then will we really have to buy a Wii U on the black market just to play the slightly enhanced versions? Granted, we'd have to do that anyway for the gamepad features, but I just think it'd be a little disappointing if we can't use the Swift sale on the GameCube app is all. Plus, you know, the HD remaster does look pretty nifty. Who knows though, maybe Nintendo will end up deciding not to leave all that money on the table and then just remaster all the best GameCube games after all. Sure, they didn't do this with any 64 games, but even they'd have to know they couldn't get away with that. The oldest Nintendo games in the world that accept re-releases from would definitely be the GameCube, but if they haven't done it yet outside of that one time they only did so temporarily because they felt like they were backed into a corner, then I don't think this is a hurdle we really gotta worry about. Seeing as how it's probably gonna be a while before we see GameCube games on the online service though, it's also possible that the Switch's successor will be out at the time, which could make the technical problems a little bit easier. I mean, I'm positive the Switch could easily run GameCube games, but it'd still be more convenient on newer hardware, so maybe Nintendo's just stalling. Either way, I'm quite certain that GameCube games coming in Nintendo subscription-based catalogs about as inevitable as my wife Chili having her cable guy over for his daily maintenance checks. I just don't think it's going to be for a while's all, given the fact that there's other consoles that'd be way easier to port games over from first, along with all the other hurdles I mentioned. Maybe the cable guy knows a thing or two about GameCube maintenance, but at any rate, though, that's all for today. If you got a kick out of my incessant rambling or disturbing imagery, though, then you should check out my video I made on every Capcom GameCube game ever made, but if you'll excuse me, though, I gotta go see if the cable guy needs a hand, or if my wife Chili's got everything under control. Later!